Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. So 2020 is already gone, and in this video I am going to recap my most memorable, my most favorite books in 2020. And I have a few books right here. I think I have 12 in total. I think I was really generous with my stars in 2020, particularly since that was the year I started using Goodreads again, and then I was pretty much throwing stars everywhere. I gave high ratings to books, and so I ended up with plenty of 5 stars on my Goodreads. Of course, there were also books that I didn't enjoy, which I would have given 1 or 2 stars if I had finished them, but then most of those books I DNF'd, so I didn't have many 1-star or 2-star ratings. But anyway, I'm not going to include all of my 5-star books in this video. I chose specific books which I thought was pretty interesting, pretty special. That's the keyword. I think these books, they gave me very special experience, which I think will always be something that I remember as part of my 2020 experience. So let's start with the first book. I arranged them randomly, so I'm just gonna talk about these books in random order. The first one is Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. Now, this book, it was great. It was fresh. I remembered having serious craving for oranges after reading this book. Before that, when I ate oranges, I would slice the oranges. But then, after reading this book, I learned that you could actually peel them. Even though often when you peel the oranges, the result, is not very good. Your hands will get sticky, the peels, the rinds will be, parts of it will stay on the orange and you'll have to eat those. So it wasn't ideal, but I learned that you could do that. But another thing that I learned was this book was really awesome. So this is about a young girl named Jeanette. She grows up in a very strict and religious Pentecostal household in England, and she's training to be a missionary. So her whole upbringing is very religious. Her life revolves around the church. But one day she realizes that she is attracted to girls. She is attracted to a particular girl. And soon she is on this very personal but somewhat funny and self-reflective journey of her own sexuality. And it introduces conflicts within herself because she believes in the teaching of the church, but at the same time it conflicts with her own desire, her own attraction towards girls. I think that was really great. This book is able to show the drama, which includes her relationship with her mom, which kind of becomes tense afterwards once the knowledge of her sexuality becomes known to her. The drama that is presented in this book, it is heartfelt, but at the same time it's not over dramatic, and it is full of hearts. It knows when to be sad, but it's not overwrought. It's light at certain places, so it feels pretty balanced, and that's why I really enjoyed reading this book. It does not take itself really seriously, but overall it was just breezy. And talking about breezy books, the next one is A Concise Chinese English Dictionary for Lovers by Xiao Luo. This book is about a woman who is from a small town in China, and she goes to London to learn English. And it is there in London that she forms a relationship with a guy. And when she just arrives to London, she does not speak English very well. And so many of her adventures, so-called adventures in her daily life in London, involves communication barriers, language barriers, cultural differences, and all the blunders that are related to those issues. And most of them come across as pretty entertaining, pretty hilarious. And at the same time, we are also treated to her romance with this particular man in London, and how their relationship kind of evolves as this woman later actually learns more about herself in her own quest to learn about another culture's language and this pretty much lifestyle. I think that this book is just really refreshing. It's really funny, and it has a very interesting form. It's quite metaphysical. It is written in similar to a kind of like a dictionary or something, where you get each chapter with words as a title, and you have the definition of each word for each of the titles in the book, each of the titles of the chapters. And then you'll have the content of the chapters would revolve around that particular word. So in that respect, it's pretty interesting. Also, there's something about the way that this book is written, the kind of English that is being used in this book, the brokenness of the English, that part is really interesting, and there is something to expect on that side of things in this book. I'm not going to talk about what it is. You'll have to read it to find out, but it really contributes to the experience of reading this book. So that's why this book is one of the awesome books this year. And then I read Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend. I don't have the physical book with me right now because I lent it to a friend, and I hope that one day I'll be able to get it back. So My Brilliant Friend is the first book in the Neapolitan novels. That book was originally written in Italian, and it was translated into the English by Anne Goldstein. And it's about these two characters, two young girls named Lila and Elena. And they are both living in this 1960s post-war Italy, in Naples, in this particularly poor neighborhood where they actually have to see like tons of violence, tons of struggle, and the society back then at the time was also quite patriarchal. And being girls at the time, especially since these girls are really smart, it's not exactly the best time for these girls to kind of spread their wings and be awesome and all that. So they encounter a lot of challenges in growing up in this kind of environment. So this book, not only it explores the relationship between these two characters. Basically, we see their friendship as something that is budding, and their friendship is really interesting. It's not something that is straightforward and warm and fuzzy and sweet and all that. It's mixed. It is supportive, but at the same time, it can be quite toxic. So that's an interesting combination. Certainly one that I would love to read about. It also explores how these two characters, they grow up in an environment that is somewhat antagonistic to their own desire, to their own personal development. So yeah, awesome stuff. And then I read the second book, a sequel for that one. This is The Story of a New Name, and I read this together with Kirsten of Kirsten0929. She's a bookstagrammer and also a commenter. And this book follows the story of those two characters when they grow up into teenagers, and one of them actually gets married. And again, it follows kind of the similar things: their friendship, their relationships with other people, and also their own personal quest in trying to making things better for themselves, developing themselves in an environment that does not particularly support them. So this book is awesome. There are still 2 more books in this series, and I'm really keen on continuing that. Moving on, last year was also the first time I read a book by Alice Smith, and this was my first by her. It's called How to Be Both. Later, I read Autumn as part of the seasonal quartet read-along organized by Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and this month in January I'm actually reading Winter. And my first time reading Alice Smith, this book was really, really awesome because I was impressed by this book. This is the kind of book that you read and you might not be able to get every single thing out of it. You might not be able to catch every single references or understand every single word, every single part of the story. But it's okay because this book does not punish you for that. Or perhaps I would say Alice Smith's writing does not punish you if you don't understand any or particular bits of the book. So How to Be Both is about 2 characters actually, and their stories are kind of interconnected to one another. And this book has 2 parts. The first part is about a young girl named George who just lost her mother, and she lives in England. And another part is about a dead Italian painter named Francesco. And these 2 parts actually kind of occur concurrently. You might think that's how that is possible when one of the character is a dead Italian painter. Well, the thing is, for the part with the dead Italian painter, he's actually already died, but he is kind of being called from heaven, I think, and goes all the way down to purgatory, and there he observes the thing that is occurring to George, the girl who is mourning the loss of her mom and who is trying to process the grief in her own ways. Now, this book is a rumination on how art can be used to, for example, process our own griefs, express ourselves. It talks a lot about art, and it gives examples of different kinds of art form: music, painting, photography, dance, all those things. But if you are not a particularly well versed in appreciating different forms of art, an art aficionado, this book still has a lot of heart in it, because basically it's just a book that is about how to deal with loss, how to deal with relationship and forming new relationships, friendships, family, those really universal things. And for that reason, I just really, really love this book. It's really warm, it's really fuzzy. And if you ever try this book and you find it challenging, just remember that you don't have to understand every single thing. Just understand what you can understand, and likely the things about family and friends and loss, those are the things that are easily understandable in this book. So go try it out. I love this one so much, and I did not regret buying this book. This year was also the first year I started a read-along group read, and my first group read was actually hosted by Jyotsna from Jyotsna's Bookscapades, and this one is Rohinton Mysteries, A Fine Balance, which is a really awesome, epic book. So this book takes place in India around the 1970s to the 1980s, and during the government of Indira Gandhi. And so at the time, the political and social environment was pretty chaotic and volatile, and that was certainly being used as a background for this the story in this novel. So this novel follows 4 different individuals, each of them coming from different backgrounds, vastly different backgrounds. 2 of them are actually from the countryside. They are of the untouchable case. And one is a student at a university, and one is a woman living in the city trying to live an independent life. And in the beginning of this book, we are being treated to the backstories of each of these individuals, and slowly as we go into this book, we see how the paths of these different characters, they converge and they end up under one roof. And at first they find themselves in a situation with begrudgingly live at the same place because they all have prejudices towards one another. But then slowly they kind of got over that. They learn how to dispel their sense of prejudice, and I just find that to be really heartwarming. This is a book that if you want to feel something, this is the book that you read, because the level of friendship that is in this book is just magic. But there are gory things in this book, so you have to beware. It's not all magic. It's not My Little Pony. You have to read this book with some sense of prepared mind, because remember, this book takes place at a time where the social climate was kind of chaotic, and so you can expect tons of violence in here, tons of blood, tons of killing. All those nasty stuff happens in this book. Now, this book was something I read in August, and I was also reading another book that takes place during Indira Gandhi's India, and that book was The Inheritance of Loss by Kiran Desai. And I would say that the comparison between these two books are very big. That book was badly written. I did not enjoy it very much. I was buddy reading that book with Sue from Sutan, and I just didn't enjoy that book. And and the comparison was just so stark that you have one book that is really nice, and you have another book that was just not there. So yeah, and safe to say that in August, Indira Gandhi was a constant present in my bookish life. Next one is a very awesome book. It's called The Shipping News. It's by Annie Proulx. This is also my first time reading something by Annie Proulx, and I loved it. I really loved the way Annie Proulx writes places, nature, the way that she writes them as something that can be dangerous, can be antagonistic to humans. At the same time, she writes it beautifully, like you have something that is, it's obviously not friendly for you, but that thing is just really beautiful. The description of oceans, sea, waves, cliffs, mountains, those kind of stuff, that happens in this book. So this book is about this man who just lost his wife, although his wife is kind of mean, and he lost his parents, although his parents were mean also, and also he lost his job, and he takes his daughters and his aunt to his ancestral home in Newfoundland, Canada, which is an island. And compared to where he lived before that, he used to be in the United States, the environment in Newfoundland is vastly different. So this book is a book about a fresh start of characters trying to start their life anew. And this man, Coyle, he is trying to kind of begin a new life in a totally new place, totally strange place, surrounded by total strangers, and trying to readjust his life there. I think it's really inspiring, and overall this is the kind of book that you would read if you want to feel some sense of positivity in your life. That one I can assure you, because this book is kind of like a Hallmark movie with all its sentimentality and mushiness, but it's repackaged in this lovely literary fiction novel. So if you want something that makes you feel good, read this book, because I can tell you that you won't regret it. I read Middlesex sometime in the beginning of this year. I think it was in March. The lockdown began on the 18th of March, and I remember reading this book while I was at home not working. So that was probably one of the reasons why this book was pretty memorable. But in any case, this book was awesome also. So this book is a coming-of-age novel / domestic fiction. The coming-of-age part of it is about this intersex man named Kow, and he is kind of trying to discover himself. He's on his journey to discover himself, starting when he is still a child, all the way until he is somewhat older, I think in his 20s or so. As a child, he is assigned the gender, female is the female gender. And in his youth, he kind of discovers that he has certain feeling that he has within himself and towards other people. And there are certain incongruity that he identifies in himself, and slowly he learns more and more about who he is biologically and also mentally. And I think that part is just really lovely. And another part of this novel, the domestic fiction. So Kow's family is actually, his grandparents came from Turkey. They are Turkish Greek people who escaped the Smyrna massacre, and so they came to the United States and reside in Detroit. And this novel also follows their history when they on how they escaped the massacre and how they lived their lives when they just arrived in the United States, and their early lives of the grandparents in Detroit, and something that happens at that time that is probably related to who Kow is as a person. So you just need to read this book to find out what that is. I think it's kind of interesting. I really enjoyed it, and 5 star from me. Next one is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This book was originally written in Japanese, translated into the English by Ginny Tapley Takemori. This is a slim book, but I think this book packs a punch. So this book is about this convenience store worker, a woman named Keiko, who is in her 30s. And one thing that is special about her is that she's already in her 30s, but she's not married, and she still works as a convenience store worker, and she has been doing that for 15 years. And her family and friends, they are not so keen on having her choosing that as her life path. They were kind of interested, or rather they were a little bit troubled and bothered by the fact that Keiko is still single and she's working as a convenience store worker. But Keiko herself does not mind. But in this book, something happens to her that she kind of starts to question her own identity and her own decision when it comes to is it right for her to be unmarried? Is it right for her to still work as a convenience store worker? And I'm not gonna say what kind of resolution that she'll arrive to, but I love this book because it is the kind of book that kind of asks the question of how does a person fit within a society, and what should a person do when there is a conflict between the desire to fulfill oneself, one's own individuality, and also, to fulfill the expectations of the society. This is a really lovely book. It's funny and it's clear, straight to the point. Just really, really entertaining. I still have 4 books left. The next one is I'll Be Right There by Kyung-Sook Shin. This book was translated from the South Korean. This book was translated from Korean. There's no such thing as a South Korean language, I think. By Sora Kim Russell. So this book is about the relationship between a group of friends, and central to that, the main character of this book is a girl named Jung-Yoon, who just lost her mother in the beginning of this novel, and she goes to university. And it is at the university that she meets with these friends. And in their group also includes one of her childhood friends. And this book explores the relationship that shapes the way that these friends connect with one another. And it also explores how the relationship between the members of this group of friends kind of dissolve or get broken. And this book is set in South Korea in the 1980s during the time of political uprising. So the climate, the political and social climate at the time was pretty volatile, and people disappear all the time, and bad things happen to good people. That's not a minor spoiler. And yeah, this book is actually a very quiet book. It's a somber book. The cover suggests that. It's a very gray book. But it is not a book that makes you sad all the way. It has a sad undertone, but it will make you feel more reflective. It makes you think about your own relationship, your own life. And at the same time, there is, unlike sadness, there is actually a stronger sense of nostalgia in this book. So I think that's what I want to say. This book is not so much about feeling sad and gloomy, although those two are pretty important in this book. But this book is mainly about memory and remembering the relationships that have been made in the past, and mostly about nostalgia. Very mushy stuff actually, but the sentimentality that is featured in this book is just awesome. Yeah. Next one is a book by Zijian, and this one is called The Last Quarter of the Moon, translated into the English from Chinese by Bruce Humes. Now, the original title of this book is actually The Left Bank of the Argun River. The Left Bank of the Argun River. I think that title is probably a little bit more magical, a little bit more graphic compared to The Last Quarter of the Moon. But nevertheless, this book is, as a whole, very magical. So this is a multi-generational family saga of a particular Evenki tribe in northeastern China, and they live near the Argun River, and they live in the mountains, and they practice a nomadic lifestyle. And this story takes place in the 20th century, starting at the beginning of the 20th century, all the way I think in the 80s, I believe. But anyway, we see how this particular community, a very small community of a group of Evenki tribes member, how they live their lives, how they interact with nature, and also how they respond to the things that are happening to China at that time. Namely, to some of the most important stuff includes the Japanese invasion, and also the time when China becomes more and more modernized, and modernization actually comes to these Evenki tribes member. I think that the story is presented in such a way that is really magical. There is a lot of magical realism elements, stuff like prophecy, stuff like shaman, stuff like how nature is being personified as something that is alive. And what's really interesting is that we see how these members, not only we see how they respond to nature, which is pretty much what they live with all their lives, but also how they respond to the important things that are happening to China at the time, and how they're kind of both involved and at the same time detached from all of those things. But nevertheless, those things affect their lifestyle. They used to be nomadic, and then that slowly changed bit by bit. And we see the progression of the change that is happening to their community. it's really fascinating. Before I read this book, I didn't know anything about the Evenki tribe, and this book kind of, it introduced me to a totally whole new world. And the writing style in this book is just so warm. It is kind of dispassionate, and it makes you feel cozy inside when you read the stories about each of the members of this tribe in here. Then I read Olga Tokarczuk's Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. Again, I'm speechless because this book is incredible. I love it so much. It's about this old woman who lives in the woods in Poland, and one day she discovers the death of her neighbor, and that death is actually just one of the first deaths that are going to happen later in this book. So, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, see how this particular old woman character, the main character, how she kind of responds to this death, and how the people around within that community respond to these series of deaths. And what's interesting is that this character named Janina, she is kind of eccentric. She practices astrology. She is kind of an amateur in astrology, and she has a strong passion for nature, and she believes that there is a reason why these people die, and they die because of murder. That's what she thinks, and she comes up with all this rationalization on why these people die, and she tells it to the authorities, the police, but they don't believe her. And this book kind of becomes a book where the murder mystery, the mystery part of it, is not about who done it. Like, it's also about whether these deaths are actually murder or not, or what is the direction that this particular mystery is going to take. Because for all we know, we don't know how these people die, and this book goes into that in more and more detail, and at the same time treat us with this particularly wacky and eccentric character of Janina. I just love this one. I was really impressed. And then last but not least, I also read this book by a Malaysian author. This one is called The Sum of Our Follies. This is by Shih-Li Kow. And this book is about the life in a small town in Malaysia, which is actually a fictional small town, but I feel that that small town, it kind of represents how life in Malaysian small town generally is. So this book is something that you could say is somewhat of a fantasy, or maybe an urban fantasy, because some parts of this book, some of the things that happen in that small town, things like man eating fishes, you also have exorcism, you have locust infestation, you also have things like LGBT revolution, which God knows is something that is not going to happen in a small town in Malaysia anytime soon. So those are the things that feels kind of fantastical in this book, in this particular small town. And at the same time, this book also explores the relationship of some of the characters in that particular small town, which namely one woman named Bivi, who is the proprietress of the guest house in that small town, and the arrival of a little girl into that small town named Mary Ann. She's an orphan, and she finds herself under the care of Bivi, because apparently she is connected to Bivi through something in her family past. So that's the intriguing side of the domestic fiction. But this book is also about the progression of how this small town kind of exists. I wouldn't say that that small town evolves. It does experience change, but it experiences change in a way that it's not like going up, but it's just up and down, up and down, up and down. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed this book. It feels like a really grounded, very down to earth, very humble kind of book. Even though it does contain some elements that are very fantastical. So those are the books that I found really awesome in 2020, and I think I might have talked too much about those books, so I'm going to end this video right now. But I'm really glad that I was able to get those off my chest, because raving about my favorite books is definitely something that I love doing, and I think that was the reason why this channel exists also. So, sorry not sorry. And I'll see you again in a different video, and until then, take care, thanks for watching, and bye bye.